You've been defending yourself your entire life, not in a courtroom, not in front of a judge, but somewhere worse, inside your own mind. And in every conversation where someone looked at you with slight confusion, you rushed to explain. Let me tell you why I did that. No, wait, that's not what I meant. I just want you to understand. You've been standing trial for years, and the strangest part? You're the one who built the courtroom. You appointed the judge. You selected the jury. You wrote the charges. And every single time, you showed up to defend a version of yourself that didn't even need defending. Think about it. When was the last time someone asked you for an explanation, and your answer actually changed their mind? When was the last time your 3-paragraph text message made someone suddenly say, "Oh, now I understand you completely"? It didn't happen. It never happens. Because explanation is not communication. Explanation is submission. It is the quiet act of handing someone a key to your inner world and hoping they don't use it against you. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "We love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Read that again. We love ourselves more than other people, but we care more about what they think of us than what we think of ourselves. That is the paradox that keeps you explaining. That is the invisible chain that pulls you into every courtroom you were never summoned to. This video is not about becoming cold. It is not about ignoring people or shutting the world out. This video is about something far more precise. It is about learning the difference between communication and confession, between sharing and surrendering, between speaking with purpose and speaking from fear. Because the man who explains himself from a position of strength sounds very different from the man who explains himself from a position of need. And right now, whether you realize it or not, most of your explanations are coming from need. Let's change that. Let's walk through this together. Before we talk about stopping, we need to understand why you started. Nobody is born with the need to explain. Watch a child. A 2-year-old doesn't justify his emotions. He doesn't write a paragraph about why he's crying. He doesn't send a follow-up message after being upset. He feels, he expresses, and then he moves on no explanation needed. So where did it begin? It began when someone important to you, a parent, a teacher, a friend, a partner, made you feel that your actions were only valid if they could be understood by others. Somewhere along the way, you received a silent message. You are only acceptable when you are explainable. And that message didn't come once. It came 1,000 times, in small moments. A raised eyebrow when you made a choice they didn't expect. A cold silence when you set a boundary. A disappointed sigh when you said no. Psychology calls this approval conditioning. Your brain learned, not through logic, but through repetition, that unexplained behavior leads to rejection. And rejection, for a social species, feels like danger. Real danger. Now your amygdala, the ancient alarm system in your brain, doesn't know the difference between being chased by a predator and being misunderstood by someone you care about. It fires the same signal. Protect yourself. And how did you learn to protect yourself? Not with fists, not with walls, with words. You learned to explain, to justify, to over-clarify. You became fluent in the language of self-defense, and you didn't even know you were doing it. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, described this trap perfectly. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The fear of being misunderstood, that is the imagination Seneca is talking about. You haven't been rejected yet. You haven't lost anything yet. But your mind has already played the entire movie, the argument, the silence, the distance, the loss. And so you rush to explain, not because someone asked, but because you're afraid of the movie your mind just created. This is the root. This is the seed. And until you see it clearly, you will keep defending a man who doesn't need a defense. Now let's talk about what it costs you. Because explanation is not free. It has a price. And you've been paying it for years without reading the bill. The first cost is energy. Every time you over-explain, you spend mental resources on someone else's perception of you. You edit your words. You rehearse your tone. You predict their reaction. You calculate, adjust, rephrase. This is not communication. This is emotional labor performed for someone who may not even be listening carefully. The second cost is position. When you explain yourself constantly, you unconsciously place yourself below the person you're explaining to. You become the student justifying his homework to the teacher, the employee defending his decision to the boss. Even when the relationship is equal, even when you're talking to a friend, a sibling, a partner, the act of over-explaining shifts the power. It says, your understanding of me is more important than my understanding of myself. The third cost, and this is the one nobody talks about, is identity erosion. The more you explain who you are, the less you actually know who you are. Because explanation forces you to translate yourself into someone else's language. And every translation loses something. Every time you reshape your truth to fit someone else's framework, a small piece of the original disappears. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He wrote, "How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he himself does to make it just and holy." He didn't say, explain your choices to your neighbor. He said, stop looking at what your neighbor thinks. The energy you spend explaining, redirect it inward. Use it for building, not defending. Imagine you're a sculptor. You have a limited amount of marble. Every explanation is a chip off that marble, not to create your statue, but to create a smaller statue that fits inside someone else's gallery. Over time, there's nothing left. The marble is gone, and you're standing in someone else's gallery with a version of yourself you don't even recognize. That is the cost. That is what over-explaining takes from you. Now, let me be precise here, because there's a dangerous misunderstanding that floats around the internet. The idea that strong men don't talk. That silence means shutting everyone out. That boundaries mean building walls so high nobody can see you. That is not what we're saying. That is not Stoicism. That is isolation disguised as strength. The Stoics were some of the greatest communicators in history. Marcus Aurelius wrote an entire book of private reflections that has been read for 2,000 years. Seneca wrote 124 letters, open, vulnerable, detailed letters, to his friend, Lucilius. Epictetus taught in classrooms, answering questions, challenging students, engaging with every objection. These men were not silent. They were selective. And that is the distinction this video is built on, the difference between communication and confession. Communication is intentional. It is a choice. You speak because the moment requires it, because the relationship benefits from it, because your words will build something. Communication comes from a position of clarity. You know what you want to say, you say it, and you let it land. Confession is reactive. It is fear-driven. You speak because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. You explain because silence feels dangerous. Confession doesn't come from clarity. It comes from anxiety. It is not designed to build. It is designed to prevent loss. The question you need to ask yourself, every time you feel the urge to explain, is simple. Am I communicating or confessing? Am I sharing this because it will create understanding, or because I'm afraid of being misunderstood? Am I speaking to connect, or speaking to control how someone sees me? Epictetus taught, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And this applies directly to the urge to explain. The event, someone questioning you, doubting you, misunderstanding you, is neutral. It is your reaction that determines whether you communicate with strength or confess from fear. A man who communicates says, "Here is what I've decided," and then he's silent. A man who confesses says, "Here is what I've decided, and here's why, and I hope you understand. And I know it might seem strange, but if you think about it from my perspective, feel the difference? One is a full stop. The other is a run-on sentence that never ends, because it was never about the other person understanding. It was about you managing your own anxiety. Now let me tell you a story. In the year 41 AD, Seneca, one of the wealthiest, most respected philosophers in Rome, was exiled to the island of Corsica. The charge was adultery, likely fabricated, likely political. Overnight, he went from the center of Roman power to a rocky, barren island in the Mediterranean. Now think about what you would do. Think about the emails you would send, the messages, the explanations, the letters to every friend saying, "This isn't fair. Let me tell you what really happened. Let me explain my side." Seneca didn't do that. He wrote, but not to defend himself. He wrote to his mother, Helvia, not to explain his exile, but to comfort her. His letter, known as Consolation to Helvia, is one of the most remarkable documents in Stoic literature. In it, Seneca doesn't explain why he was exiled. He doesn't list his defenses. He doesn't argue his innocence. Instead, he writes, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it." Even in exile, even stripped of his reputation, his wealth, his social standing, Seneca chose not to explain. He chose to live. He chose to write philosophy, not defense speeches. He chose to use his energy for creation, not justification. And here is the part that matters most. Seneca was eventually recalled from exile. 8 years later, he was brought back to Rome and became one of the most powerful advisors in the empire. His reputation recovered, not because he explained himself, but because he used those 8 years to produce some of the most important philosophical writing in Western history. The world didn't need his explanation. The world needed his work. And that is true for you, too. The people around you don't need your explanations. They need your results. They need to see the man you're becoming, not hear the defense of the man you used to be. If you've been watching this and something inside you keeps nodding, that's not coincidence. That's recognition. This channel was built for minds that think in silence. Subscribe, and let's keep walking this path together. Now let's go deeper, because knowing you should stop explaining is one thing. Actually stopping is another. And the reason it's so hard is not weakness, it's wiring. Your brain has a system called the default mode network, the DMN. This is the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on an external task. When you're lying in bed at night, replaying conversations. When you're in the shower, rehearsing what you should have said. When you're driving, imagining confrontations that haven't happened. The DMN is your brain's storytelling machine, and its favorite story? Self-justification. Research in cognitive neuroscience has shown that the DMN becomes hyperactive in people with high social anxiety and approval-seeking behavior. The brain literally cannot stop constructing narratives about how others perceive you. It's running a 24-hour courtroom, and you are always on the stand. This is why silence feels uncomfortable. When you choose not to explain, the DMN doesn't go quiet. It gets louder. it starts generating worst-case scenarios. They'll think you don't care. They'll think you're arrogant. They'll leave. And your amygdala, the alarm center, picks up those signals and treats them as threats. While your heart rate increases, your chest tightens, your fingers itch to pick up the phone and type that paragraph. But here's what the research also shows. The DMN can be trained. Practices like mindfulness meditation, cognitive diffusion from acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and Stoic journaling all reduce DMN hyperactivity over time. Marcus Aurelius was practicing exactly this, 2,000 years before neuroscience had a name for it. Every night, he sat in his tent and wrote, not to explain himself to others, but to observe his own thoughts without being controlled by them. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That power over your mind, that is DMN regulation. That is the ability to watch the courtroom drama inside your head and say, I see the trial, and I see the jury, but I'm choosing not to testify. This is not easy. It will feel wrong at first. Your body will resist it. Your hands will want to type. Your mouth will want to open. But every time you sit in that discomfort, every time you choose silence over justification, you are rewiring the circuit. You are training your brain to find peace without permission. Let me reveal something you may not have noticed. When you over-explain, you think you're talking to one person. But in reality, you're performing for 3 audiences at the same time. The first audience is the person in front of you, the friend, the partner, the family member, the colleague. This is the obvious one. They asked a question, or maybe they didn't, and you felt the need to clarify. The second audience is the imagined crowd. These are the people who aren't even in the room, the people you think might hear about your decision, the people you imagine whispering behind your back, the coworker who might misinterpret your email, the acquaintance who might judge your choice. This crowd doesn't exist in the present moment, but your brain treats them as real. The third audience, and this is the one that controls everything, is yourself. When you over-explain, you are often trying to convince yourself that your choice was valid. You are seeking your own approval, disguised as seeking theirs. You are replaying your own decision and using the other person as a mirror to check if it still looks right. Epictetus understood this perfectly. He said, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, 'He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone.'" Look at what Epictetus is doing here. He is refusing all 3 audiences at once. He doesn't explain to the person in front of him. He doesn't worry about the imagined crowd, and he doesn't seek his own validation. Instead, he uses humor, a gentle self-awareness, to disarm the entire situation. This is mastery, not silence as suppression, silence as clarity. He knows who he is. And because he knows who he is, he doesn't need to explain who he is. Now, here is the practical exercise. Next time you feel the urge to explain, pause and ask, which audience am I performing for? Is it the person in front of me? Is it the imagined crowd? Or is it myself? If it's the person in front of you, and the explanation is genuinely needed, speak. So communicate, but keep it to the point. No padding, no softening, no emotional insurance. If it's the imagined crowd, stop. They don't exist right now. They may never exist. Your DMN is creating them. If it's yourself, sit with it. Journal. Breathe. You don't need to convince yourself through someone else's ears. You already made the choice. Trust it. There is a skill that almost nobody teaches. Schools don't teach it. Self-help books rarely mention it, and most men have never practiced it. It's the skill of ending a sentence, not trailing off, not adding "but" at the end, not softening with "I hope that makes sense," or "I don't know if that's clear," not tagging on "Does that make sense?" like a student submitting homework, just ending. I've decided to leave. Full stop. I'm not available that day. Full stop. I don't agree with that. Full stop. Feel how different that is from I've decided to leave. And I know it might seem sudden, and I've been thinking about it for a while, and I just feel like it's the right thing, and I hope you understand. The first version is a door that closes calmly. The second version is a door that swings open wider with every word. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested." And this applies to speech as much as time. Your words are a resource. Every sentence you speak is an investment. And over-explanation is the worst possible return on that investment, because it diminishes the value of everything you've already said. Think of the most respected person you know, the person whose words carry weight. When they speak, people listen, not because they speak loudly, but because they speak rarely. And when they do speak, they stop. That is the art of the full stop. Here's how you practice. Start small. In your next conversation, whether it's a text message, a phone call, or a face-to-face exchange, say what you mean, and then stop. Don't add the explanation. Don't add the softener. Don't add the "just so you know" appendix. Your body will resist. The DMN will scream at you. The imagined crowd will whisper. But the person in front of you, so they will hear something they rarely hear. A man who means what he says and doesn't need your approval to say it. That is authority. Not the authority of a title or a position. The authority of a man who is finished apologizing for his existence. Every night, after commanding the most powerful army in the world, Marcus Aurelius returned to his tent, not to celebrate, not to strategize for the next battle, but to do something far more radical. He picked up his journal, and he wrote, not to the Roman Senate, not to his generals, not to history. He wrote to himself. And here is what makes this extraordinary. In those pages, what we now call meditations, Marcus never explains himself to anyone. He never says, "Let me tell you why I did this." He never defends his decisions. He never justifies his emotions. Instead, he observes them. He holds them up like stones and examines them, without attachment, without judgment, without the need for anyone else to approve. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." This sentence, 12 words, contains the entire philosophy of silent authority. Stop arguing about it. Stop explaining it. Stop defending the concept. Just be it. Let the actions speak. Let the silence speak. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire for 19 years. He fought wars. He survived plague. He buried children. He was surrounded by advisors, senators, generals, every one of them with an opinion about how he should rule. And every night, he went back to his tent. And he didn't write a defense. He wrote an observation. "Today I was angry. Why? Today I was afraid. What was I afraid of? Today I wanted to be understood. By whom? And why did it matter?" This is what Stoic journaling looks like. It is not a diary, it is a mirror. And the mirror doesn't need you to explain what it sees. It just reflects. I want you to try this tonight. Before you sleep, open a notebook, or open the notes on your phone, and write 3 sentences. Not explanations, observations. Today I felt the urge to explain myself when blank. The audience I was performing for was blank. What I actually needed in that moment was blank. Don't judge the answers. Don't edit them. Just observe them. This is not a writing exercise. This is a sovereignty exercise. You are training your mind to witness itself without testifying, to see the courtroom and walk out. Now let's address the hardest part. Because some of you are thinking, this sounds powerful. But what about the people who won't let me be silent? What about the ones who demand an explanation? Your mother who says, "Why won't you tell me what's going on?" Your partner who says, "I deserve to know why." Your friend who says, "You owe me an explanation." These people are real, and some of them genuinely care about you. So let me be very clear. This is not about punishing them with silence. This is not about weaponizing your new boundary. That is manipulation, and manipulation is the opposite of Stoic philosophy. The distinction is this. There is a difference between someone asking you to communicate and someone asking you to confess. When your partner says, "Can we talk about what happened?" that is a request for communication. It deserves your presence, your honesty, your willingness to engage. But when someone says, "Explain yourself," with that specific tone, that specific energy, they are not asking you to share. They are asking you to submit. They want access to the courtroom. They want you on the stand. Epictetus made this distinction with devastating clarity. No man is free who is not master of himself. If someone can demand an explanation from you and receive one every single time, they are your master. Not because they're controlling, but because you've trained yourself to respond to their demand. Like a reflex, they pull the string and you speak. Freedom is not refusing to talk. Freedom is choosing when to talk, how much to say, and when to stop. Here is the language of a man who communicates without confessing. I hear you. I understand this matters to you. Here's what I can share right now. And then, only what's necessary, not the full story, not the emotional backstory, not the 3-paragraph justification. Just what's needed. And if they push for more, if they demand the full courtroom performance, I've shared what I'm able to share. I hope you can respect that. Full stop. No, I'm sorry if that's not enough. No, I know this is frustrating. Just the statement, and then silence. That silence will feel like a cliff. You'll feel like you're falling, but you're not falling. You're standing. For the first time, you're standing on ground that belongs to you. The Stoics had a concept that most philosophy videos never mention. It wasn't a rule, it was a practice, and it changed how I think about every word I speak. The concept is this. Before you speak, so I pass your words through 3 gates. Gate 1, is it true? Gate 2, is it necessary? Gate 3, is it kind? If your words pass through all 3 gates, speak. If they fail at any gate, remain silent. Now, apply this to explanation. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, run it through the 3 gates. Is the explanation true? Probably. Most of your explanations are honest. Gate 1, passed. Is the explanation necessary? This is where most explanations die, because necessary doesn't mean makes me feel better. Necessary means, does the other person genuinely need this information to move forward? Or am I providing it because I need the relief of being understood? Be honest. Most of the time, the explanation isn't necessary. The other person will survive without it. The relationship will survive without it. The only thing that won't survive without it is your anxiety. And that anxiety is not a valid reason to speak. Gate 3, is it kind? This is subtle, because sometimes an explanation, especially a long, unsolicited one, is not kind. It burdens the other person with your internal process. It forces them to manage your emotions. It turns a simple interaction into a therapy session they didn't sign up for. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future." And anxious dependence, that is exactly what over-explanation is. You're not present. You're dependent on a future reaction. You're speaking now to control how someone feels later. And that dependence robs both of you. It robs you of your peace, and it robs them of the chance to simply trust you. So here is the golden rule. Speak only what passes through all three gates. And when in doubt, when you're standing at the second gate, unsure if the explanation is truly necessary, choose silence. Not because silence is always the answer, but because silence gives you time. And in that time, clarity arrives. And clarity, not speed, is the foundation of authority. Marcus Aurelius used a metaphor that has echoed through 2,000 years of philosophy. He called it the inner citadel, a fortress inside the mind, unreachable, unshakable, sovereign. Inside the inner citadel, you do not explain, not because you can't, but because there is no one to explain to. The citadel is yours alone. The walls are built from every moment you chose silence over submission. Every time you sat with discomfort instead of typing that paragraph. And every time you said, "I've decided," and didn't add "because." The citadel is not cold. It is not empty. Inside, there is warmth. There is clarity. There is the quiet confidence of a man who knows himself well enough to stop translating himself for others. Marcus wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That retreat, that is where we've been walking toward for the last 55 minutes. Every block of this video has been one step closer to that door. The door of the inner citadel. The door that doesn't open from the outside. The door that doesn't require a password or an explanation or a justification. It only requires one thing: your decision to stop performing for an audience that was never truly watching. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. The people you've been explaining yourself to? Most of them weren't listening as carefully as you thought. Most of them formed their opinion long before your explanation began. And most of them, if they truly care about you, don't need your words. They need your presence. They need the version of you that shows up fully, speaks deliberately, and doesn't shrink to fit. Tonight, when you close your eyes, picture the citadel. Picture the walls. Picture the gate. And picture yourself walking in, alone, unhurried, without a single word of explanation trailing behind you. That silence, that is not absence. That is arrival. If you stayed until this point, you are not just watching. You are becoming. This channel exists for the man who is tired of performing for courtrooms that have no jurisdiction over his life. Hit subscribe. This is where silent minds gather. Let me leave you with this. Tomorrow, someone will ask you why. Why you changed. Why you're quiet. Why you no longer rush to defend yourself. Why you no longer send the long message. Why you no longer stay in the argument until 3 in the morning. And for the first time, you will feel the urge rise. And you will let it pass. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that the strongest answer in any language is not a sentence, it is a period. Seneca wrote, "While we wait for life, life passes. Don't wait for their understanding. Don't wait for their approval. Don't wait for the jury to deliver its verdict. Walk into your citadel. Close the gate. And begin the only work that has ever truly mattered, the work of becoming the man who needs no defense. Because that man, the quiet one, the still one, the one who no longer explains, he is not hiding. He has simply arrived.